for attending this budget workshop.
Prayer and pledge. Prayer and
It's a
pledge.
workshop.
Oh,
Just had what I wanted. Where am I? Let it go. There it is. Yeah. Okey-doke. We're going to start with the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I move.
Motion by Mr. McGilvery. Second by Mr. Guy. Is there any discussion? All in favor? It's a 5-0 vote for the clerk. For the record, Mr. Lawrence is not in attendance and Ms. Newman is not in attendance. Thank you. Any report from the mayor's office?
Yeah, just reporting he's on the way back.
He's on the way back, okay. Any council reports, Mr. Gaines? None. Mr. McGilvery?
No report.
Mr. Glavin?
none.
Mr. Shoemaker? And I have none. That brings us to the public agenda. Are there any comments by citizens? And if they are related, should you have any comments as we go through the non-departmentals, that would be a good time to speak up then rather than at this time. But if there's anybody who wishes to comment, you're welcome. It's not a question and answer period. You'll have up to 3 minutes. But anyway, we'll start with that. Is anybody on my right, your left, that wishes to speak? Nobody. Anybody on my left, your right, that wishes to speak? Nobody. Anybody in the back? Nobody. Thank you. That brings us to the policy agenda. And at this point, I'd like for us to look at the non-departmentals. And I'd like to take them one at a time, and if we can just come to some consensus, we won't be voting today, but we will come to some consensus, hopefully, on each of the items that are listed on the non-departmental list so that you will have an idea of whether what you're requesting is funded fully or not when you leave today. Okay? So if we start at the top of the list, non-departmental 141, George Orr, O&M, electricity, and we're looking at the George Orr lease. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Leonard. We're looking at a lease for the George Orr, and if it's approved later at the regularly scheduled meeting tonight, then these will be wrapped up in the lease agreement. Is that accurate? Okay, so we are, all right, so are we looking at right now the O&M for electricity for $84,000 or not?
That's all we know right now.
Okay, so that's what they're requesting. We'll look at that. Any questions about that item? That's also the amount that is being looked at for inclusion in the lease tonight that we'll address later. Any questions by the council? Any thoughts by the council? Is everybody good with that figure? Not good with that figure? Again, that's going to be the figure that's in the lease agreement tonight if it's approved. If there aren't any comments, then we'll have consensus on that. We'll move to the next one. Last comment, anything on non-departmental 141? All right, so we seem to be good with that one. Non-departmental 152, that's a seafood museum. O&M electricity, it's $45,000. Is everybody good with that figure on the council? That's what it was last year. We're all good with that? All right, there's consensus on that item. That brings us to non-departmental 189. That's the Mardi Gras Museum. Again, the power bill, electricity, it's $12,000 being requested. It was $12,000 in this current year. Any discussion on that? If not, we're all on consensus, in consensus on that item. Okay? Non-departmental, another 141, George Orr, the repair and maintenance. The request is for $40,000. That's also the amount that would be wrapped up in the lease agreement, if I recall correctly, with the repair and maintenance fund that would be established. This past year, we allocated or paid $53,800 for ore repair and maintenance. What's being requested is $40,000 for this next fiscal year. Any discussion on that, or is everybody good with that?
Councilman, I'd like
Yes.
to make one comment about that. Like the Seafood Museum, the Ore Museum sometimes will have an unusual, unscheduled problem regarding, like a chiller that would go out, for example. When those cases happen, if they're outside of the budget amount, they have the right to come back to council to ask for more money at that time.
Right, and they would be able to do that, I'm assuming, under this lease that's being proposed at later tonight's meeting, is that correct?
They can do it today, and they'll do it again. They'll have that agreement with the lease.
Okay, all right, so any further discussion on the George Ore repair and
I
maintenance?
do on the 40 grand. Has that been scheduled out, or is that just a arbitrary figure? I mean,
It's about half of what they asked for.
not what they asked for. Have we detailed what that maintenance figure is for in detail, or is it just an arbitrary request?
They have given us a list of all of the expenditures they've had in the last year.
And this seems to be in range with that.
It's not, actually, their list, David, do you remember what that balance was? That uncovered budget?
If you'd tell us, excuse me, if you'd tell us who you were, sir, so the clerk can note your name.
Yeah, turn it on. Turn on your microphone, please.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a while since I was here. I'm David Houston, the Executive Director of the museum, and I do have a detailed itemized list of the expenses for this year, which come to a grand total of $356,000. And what we have been doing is putting aside funds that we share with the city. If I'm not mistaken, it's currently been $25,000. So the city puts in 25, we put in 25, and that's the fund that we begin our maintenance with. And in addition to that, one of our largest expenses is the maintenance contract for our air conditioning. We have 5 buildings, and in a museum, the air conditioning and the heat run year-round to maintain the control of temperature and humidity so that the art collections don't get ruined. So we have a power bill that averages about $16,000 a month. So the maintenance fund increase we're requesting is just a minuscule part of what we put out annually, and we have our budget line item both by our service contracts as well as those things that are unexpected that I can provide for you.
So my question is, so we've been putting in 25, you're requesting an additional 15 for the maintenance, is that what I understand?
Yes, for
And that money is dispersed when you incur expenses, or do we give a $40,000 check to your, and you deposit that into your maintenance account?
We get a check, and then we match that check. So our maintenance account starts with city money and museum money, this year at $50,000, and we're requesting the increase to 40 so that we have 80,000.
I understand that, but do your actual expenses, if you only spend 25,000 this year, what happens to the other 15 that we budgeted and agreed to give to you? Does it roll over?
It would roll over, ideally. But we have never come anywhere close to not spending that maintenance when we have over $300,000 that we've been working with. So the increase is needed and, in my opinion, judicious, and we use it very responsibly, and I can demonstrate that literally line item by line item.
But all right, so earlier you said you have 300 and something thousand in expenses, so obviously the 40,000, you're gonna be able to match it to that 300,000 and kind of eat it up. So you're requesting an increase of 15,000. That's what I need to know.
Yes.
I don't know what everybody feels about that, going from 25 to 40, if everybody's okay with that, or if it requires additional debate.
I don't have a problem with it. Any comments from the other council members? So we're good with the oral request for 40,000. Is there consensus here with everybody? No objections? Okay, we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the Seafood Museum repair and maintenance. That's a $25,000 request, if I recall correctly. It's non-departmental 152. Any questions or comments about that? It's pretty much in line with past years.
As was the case with the Ore Museum, the management agreement allows the Seafood Museum to come back to the council, to the administration, if they have unusual requirements. We've got a contract working down there right now, that's got a not to exceed 90. What is it? Well in excess of what their budget is. So it's, with both of these museums, it's kind of, we'll put some money out there and hope we can live on it, but if it can't, we got to come back and ask for more.
Right.
And in both cases, in both of those museums have needed additional funds this year.
Right, that's always been the case, I think, for the Seafood Museum. That's our building, right? Just like any other city building, so we've got to maintain that, the infrastructure and so forth. That's accurate?
We'll talk about that later.
Okay. Everybody comfortable with 25,000 requested by the Seafood Museum? Seems to be the case. All right, that brings us to Cruising the Coast. Any thoughts on Cruising the Coast? They're requesting $30,000 this year. In previous years, it was 25,000 for a couple of years, and then 20,000 before that. Any comments, concerns? Okay, we're in consensus on that 25,000. That brings us to non-departmental 142 Coastwide MLK Celebration Committee. Typically, we've allocated 10,000 for that. That's what's being requested this next year. Any comments? Everybody's good with that, okay? That brings us to Biloxi High School, non-departmental 159. High School Athletic Department, they're asking for $3,000. Any questions, comments?
I do. So this is not only Biloxi High, this is Battle at the Beach. It includes several of our local high schools, but it also includes many of the regional and out-of-state high schools that come for a major baseball tournament. Over 100 teams when you combine it with softball, girls softball as well, which they have added. This is supported by the Mississippi Hotel and Lodging Association. They recognize the many out-of-town guests, families, and teams that come for a 10-day period and contribute to retail taxes and hospitality taxes. It's also supported by Coastal Mississippi because a lot of these teams and players come back for other family-oriented events, and we really leverage the look and the feel and what the Mississippi Gulf Coast is all about, and particularly Biloxi, where the concentration of hotel rooms are. So they ask for a minuscule amount compared to the other non-departmental request of $3,000. And I would ask that y'all would support it.
Okay, any other questions? Excuse me, or a comment? I have a comment that personally I'm not in favor of this. The district can afford it. They can afford to budget an additional $3,000 to the athletic department. If if you're good with that, fine. If we're good with 3,000, that's fine either way. That's just my thought. If there are other comments?
I was just going to say I agree with Councilman Glavin.
Okay.
I also want to just say that they're also talking about bringing the All-Star games down here to Shuckers Field, and that's going to be a huge deal just to show that the city have some stake in the game. So I support it also.
Okay, it sounds like the consensus is to approve $3,000, to allocate $3,000. We'll move to the next item, which is not identified with a number. It's the wreaths for Biloxi National Cemetery. The request is for $5,000. I think this is a new request this year. I don't think we've done this in the past. Any thoughts or comments on that figure? Is everybody good with that figure? All right, sounds like we're good with that figure. 5,000. That brings us to the Juneteenth celebration, an allocation for $10,000. I think last year was the first, Mr. Guines, you might know, was that
I
the
think it was
first year?
Second.
Second year, and typically we've set that money aside, and I think it's
Yes.
been reallocated to the Parks and Recreation Department. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so this would appear as a line item, I guess, in the Parks and Recreation budget. Any questions or comments on that $10,000 request? All right, sounds like we've got some consensus there. The Gulf Coast Legislative Reception for $1,500. I don't know if that's requested or not. Is there any?
No request.
No request. Any comments, thoughts, questions here? There being none, we're all in agreement, basically, that there's no request for the Gulf Coast Legislative Reception. Is that accurate? Okay, there being no objections, apparently we're all good with that consensually. That brings us to the Boom Boom Fund, which is fireworks for July 4th. $12,500 was requested. That's what we've done this current year and the year before. Prior to that, it was $10,000. We good with 12.5?
Yes. George will get us if we don't.
George will get us if we do or if we don't, regardless. All right, so we're good with 12,500. Brings us to Christmas on the Water, 3,500. We had funded that for years, did not fund it for a couple of years, and now it's back. They're back this current year. We funded them at 3,500. Everybody good with that same request for this next fiscal year? Any comments, concerns?
That is kind of a conflict, a little confusing. Actually, it's for Christmas on the Water and for the Children's Christmas Parade. They just labeled it as Christmas on the Water, but that's for both functions,
Okay.
just FYI.
All right, but it appears everybody's good with that $3,500 request. Okay, we'll move to the next one. Library and other expenses. This is a separate line item from the other request down the line. This is, I guess, a placeholder. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Leonard. This is a placeholder for expenses that that the libraries or the structures themselves, for expenses that might be incurred. Is that correct?
That was my understanding.
Okay.
I didn't see the request, actually.
Okay. So one year we spent $16,000. This current year, $25,000. Any questions or comments? Would that be accurate, Diana? That $25,000 is just to have a fund available. We don't have any specific figures or requests because we don't know what might be coming in that
Maintenance
regard.
costs for 4 libraries.
Right.
So
Okay.
I got a question. Similar to Oil Keith and Seafood Museum, does this work the same way or is it different? They would have to incur a maintenance issue for us to go in and authorize disbursement of this? That's what I'm stating. So they would have to request that they have an air conditioner that went out or a system that went out, and then they would have to request it, and this is the fund that it would come from.
Rachel, if you get to a microphone, just so we can pick you up, thank you.
Library expenses, these are funds that are actually paid by the city. They call us, say the air conditioner is broken, somebody kicked in the front door, we need a lock changed, whatever. This is to track our expenses that we're spending on top of our monthly contribution.
Understood, but they would have to incur a maintenance-related issue
Right, they would
for
incur
them
that.
to request it, and then it would come out of this pot
Correct.
that we've
They would-
allocated for maintenance for the libraries.
Right.
Okay. So if they don't use it all, it just goes back into the general fund.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Glavin. Any other questions, concerns? If not, it seems we're in consensus for that 25,000. Tunnels to towers, non-departmental 190, the request is for $5,000. We've done that in the past. Any questions or concerns about that $5,000 request? Okay, looks like we're good there. It brings us to the next section, Main Street. Main Street, in the past, we funded them at $20,000, $80,000 in '23, according to the records I have. $50,000 this current year, they're asking for $50,000.
What happened to
Any thoughts on that?
West End Fire Station Museum? Oh, they didn't ask for anything, okay.
Is there anybody here from Main Street or associated with Main Street?
Oh, well, I didn't hide it. I didn't.
Would everybody be good with $10,000 less at $40,000, or do you have a concern about that?
Well, I do. I think we need to leave it where it's at because they've done, the Downtown Main Street group has done a phenomenal job of, with the How Hop area. They were some of our biggest promoters here in the city. They keep projects going all the time. So this is a group that we do not need to back away from. Hosting the first Fridays on a regular basis, so we need to really, really think about that and all the things that they do for us.
All right, Mr. McGilvery, any thoughts?
I agree with Councilman Guines.
Okay. Mr. Glavin, you
I'm good.
good with, okay. Mr. Shoemaker, I don't want to slight you. Okay, you're good with it.
You have a habit of that sometimes. No, I do agree with Councilman.
All right, so we're good, we're consensually, we're at $50,000. The Harrison County Soil Conservation, the request in the past, it's been, some years, one year they requested $15,000. This year and last year, we funded them at $5,000. They're asking for $7,000. Any questions, comments,
I do.
any concerns?
So if we heard the presentation, there's other cities that contribute even a little bit more, but those other cities have tapped into a resource and have realized a gain. If y'all remember the presentation, Biloxi hasn't realized that yet. I'm not saying it's the fault of this organization. That also, I think they build. When he was here, they capture butterflies and they build bluebird houses and stuff like that for the children to enjoy. But I just don't know. I know it doesn't sound like a lot in an increase, but until we see, some return, I think 5,000 is the right number. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And maybe that 2,000, which we've allocated to some other increases, is more appropriate.
Mr. Shoemaker, any comments, thoughts? Any councilman have any thoughts? You good with that, 5,000? I'm good with 5,000.
Yeah, and I go along with Councilman Glavin.
Okay. So we're
But
looking,
Keesler need to kick in a little bit too, because they do a lot out there.
Okay.
Remember the question?
so we're in consensus that we'll allocate $5,000 for the Harrison County Soil and Conservation Group. The Greater Biloxi Economic Foundation, I know that we just wrote them a check recently, I think, and that was for this current year. Is that accurate? Okay, did we receive a request from the Greater Biloxi Foundation for fiscal year '25? I don't recall.
No, I think they've got adequate funds from other sources, so
Okay,
they're doing more of a membership drive as well, so they'd like to be a little more self-sustaining.
okay. So that request basically is a non-request since they didn't request anything. All right. Welcome, Ms. Newman. Non-departmental 133 is the Gulf Regional Planning. Historically, we have always allocated $20,000. They're a funding conduit, I think, for national grants or whatever. Did we receive a request from
$1
them?
million for sidewalks in Wool Market,
Yeah.
for starters.
And-
These
and-
guys are an arm of MDOT, and they are our source for a lot of projects. They also do planning. If I call them and ask them to do a traffic count at a certain intersection, it'll be done the next day. They're very responsive.
All right. The only reason I mention that is some years we've not funded them, or they've not made a request or a timely request
They-
in past years, and we've ended up basically by resolution allocating $20,000 for them. I'm in favor of plugging in 20,000 because I think it's going to be coming at some point anyway, unless
I think they-
administration knows differently.
I think they were asleep at the switch. We should have had a request.
All right, I would suggest that we allocate or set aside $20,000 as we've done historically for I don't know how many years,
Always take it back.
as long as I can remember. Is there any further discussion on that? That's non-departmental 133, it's Gulf Regional Planning, $20,000. Any thoughts, comments? We all in agreement on that? It appears that we are, okay. That brings us to the Hibernian Marching Society for $10,000. They asked for $10,000 last year, and we allocated $7,500 for them. I would suggest that we maintain that figure of $7,500, not $10,000. But there may be other comments from the council. Is everybody good with $7,500, or anyone to? Beg your pardon?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure. Come on up. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. And state your name so we can get it on the record.
Celeste O'Keefe. I'm with Hibernia, and I wanted all of you to know that we've been contacted by Main Street to take over Grilling on the Green. So what we would like to do, if we could get all that money, our goal is to work on that budget, make modifications to it, a lot of the money coming back to the city because we'll be renting space, stages and all. And we feel, like we could do that. So Grilling on the Green is such a big part of that day. And we could say Hibernia Irish Society presents Grilling on the Green and Irish Malarkey. And I feel like we would need that extra money. It was hard to do the parade. It costs a lot to make it happen. But we really appreciate the 10,000.
So if the Hibernia Society assumes the Grilling on the Green, and that's going to be a big effort, but also you could keep the revenue that's generated from that, is that accurate?
We're having a meeting with them, and I believe that we can make it work. And I don't know how much they made at this point yet, but our goal is certainly to make some money. Additionally, we're going to work hard on local restaurants that have food trucks to bring them in. And then we'll also be able to, we may make pieces of it a little different and smaller so we can bring more children into it, where we'll have our clowns making balloons, painting faces, and things like that. So it would be a little different. We'll still have Grilling on the Green, but we're looking really hard at that budget to make it so we can make it tighter and make it all work.
Could you live with $7,500 or?
It was tough. We were very lucky that we had 19 other sponsors at 400, or it's really expensive to do that parade because it's just everything you've got to do for it. And we try to keep it as tight as we can, even the decorations. I mean, we pull those off and saving some for next year.
Sure. Any thoughts on the 10,000, keep it at 10,000?
I have a question. So, Peter, this would fall under the special events, or would it be exempt? This
No, it's not
particular
a big-
event, Grilling on the Green?
It wouldn't really be a special event if they rent the town green.
Okay, so it comes under a different,
Yeah, and I guess Main
That's right.
Street used to do Grilling on the Green all these years, so I think that was always part of their budget. So if they're going to take that on and Main Street is not doing Grilling on the Green at all, it may be appropriate to shift some of that out. That's just a thought.
that is a thought. So you're kind of in inferencing, we take 2,500 away from one non-departmental and shifting it over to,
I'm not an elected official. I didn't just say that.
I think
spoken like a true attorney, yeah.
we need to hear from Main Street because we're hearing that for the first time.
That's why we're here. That's why we're,
Right. grilling on the green is a break-even situation for them?
It's sometimes less than a break even, so which is hard to
Okay.
understand.
I retract my suggestion for 7,500 and in favor of their request for 10,000. Are there any other thoughts, questions?
But like the council,
Clavin.
during his discussions, should we take some money from Main Street and shift it over to this request? And that way it would satisfy that. Main Street is not running grilling on the green, so they're incurring less expenses themselves. So
Well-
should we shift a couple of grand?
So
I'm just
Posing the
asking,
question.
throwing it out there as we work through these requests.
let's see what everybody does with what they have.
So my suggestion would be, should we consider 2,000 from Main Street and shifting that over to Hibernia and grilling on the green?
So that would bring Hibernia with that 2,000 up to what, 12,000? 95?
95.
All right, so if we go 95
100.
and then reduce Main Street by 2,000, that would be 48,000 for Main Street. Is everybody good with that?
Splitting hairs, but it kind of works.
Anybody not comfortable with that?
I think we should just leave Main Street the way it is and just add 2 more thousand to Hibernia. That would be my suggestion. Make it easy
All right, so
and move it forward. That's just my suggestion.
I'm comfortable with that as well. So we leave Main Street at 50,000, and Hibernia would be funded at 9,500. Everybody's good with that?
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. That brings us next to the George Orr Management Agreement. It's $60,000 as requested in the past. That was 48,000, but as I understand it, that 60,000 is going to be rolled into that lease agreement that we'll act on later at the regularly scheduled council meeting. Any discussion on that? 60,000. Everybody good with that? Think we're good with that. All right, we're good with that. Thank you. Seafood Museum, the annual audit is, I believe historically, well, I can't say historically. I don't know when I think we started paying for that recently, just in the last couple of years.
No, we've always paid for it.
We've always paid for that.
And
Okay.
unlike the OR pays for their own.
Right.
And the,
Okay, so we've picked up historically, we've picked up the annual audit for the Seafood Museum. That's allocated at 13,000, which is what it is this current year. Any discussion? Everybody's good with that, sounds like? Okay. The Seafood Museum, the management contract is for 92,000. That covers sea and sail camp, I think, as well as the advertising of the logo on the schooners. We've done that for the past several years. Any discussion on that item? Everybody's good with 92,000, it sounds like. Okay, that brings us to CASA, 10,000, which is what we've allocated in the past for them. Any discussion on that? That's non-departmental 178. We're good with that, okay? Brings us to the Mardi Gras Museum, the management agreement. It's been 60,000 since fiscal year 2023. There's no request for an increase. Everybody good with the Mardi Gras Museum management agreement at
I have a
60,000?
question.
Yes.
Is the bread included in that?
Okay, thank you. A moment of levity. Even though only 2 people in the room got it, but that was you took a shot. The Croc Center Salvation Army for 20,000. We've done that for a couple of years. I don't believe there was a request last year, but there is this year for the Croc Center. Is everybody good with 20,000 for the Croc Center?
Yes.
Okay, we're all good with that. That brings us to the Knights of Peter Claver. Workforce development in the past, I think in fiscal year '23, that was at $10,000 was allocated. I don't recall any allocations before then. They're requesting $20,000. Any comments? Everybody good with 20,000? Any concerns, comments?
They do a great job with our parks. We have some of the best parks probably in the city of Biloxi and what they're doing to them, and that small amount couldn't match the work that they're doing.
All right, everybody's good with 20,000. All right. Brings us to Crime Stoppers. They've requested $3,000, which is what they requested for this current year. Any discussion on that, or is everybody good with that? You think 5,000? Any other comments or concerns, or we are good? Are we all good with 5,000?
It's a great program. They do a lot.
Any other comments or concerns? Are we in consensus for 5,000? I think, okay, it appears we are. All right. That brings us to the facade grant. Non-departmental 406. Who is it that's actually requesting this for the facade grant for 10,000?
This is just, it's a line item for when we have two prior facade grants. As they turn in their tax receipts, they're paid.
Right, if they meet the criteria, then they're eligible for these.
Yeah, there's no new facade grants. These are prior facade grants that go forward like another 10 years or so that are being paid.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
it's roughly 10,000 in sales tax between the two of those.
Okay. Any questions or concerns about that? All right, we're all good with 10,000. Okay, the Harrison County Library Commission, they're asking for an increase of $2,000. Any questions or concerns? That'd be an increase from 780 to 782,000. Any questions, comments, concerns? Everybody's good with that? All right. Sold to the highest bidder, so we're consensus on that. The Coast Transit Authority, they're requesting $392,735. That's a decrease of a couple of $1,000. Any thoughts, concerns on that? Everybody good with $392,735? Motor vehicle for hire, again, we pay a pro rata rate based on the number of drop-offs. One of three cities in this agreement, Gulfport, D'Iberville, and Biloxi. It's an increase of $35,200 to $36,800. Any concerns, thoughts on that?
That's good news.
Yeah, it's always good
More
news.
taxis coming to Biloxi.
All right, I think we're all good with that. Public insurance, property insurance, that's been removed from non-departmentals. I mean, historically, it's where it appeared in the past, but no longer. All right, Gulf Coast Women's Shelter for Nonviolence, they've requested $30,000. Last year, we allocated, if my figures are correct, $5,000. But we had also allocated $20,000 for the Family Justice Center. This year, I do want to note that the Community Development Block Grants is, under CDBG funding, is allocating $7,500, which we've already approved, for the Coastal Family Health, $20,000 for the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence. I think that was for a child-focused program or something child-related. And then More Community House, we've approved $30,000 out of federal community development block grants.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure you can. This is appropriate. Go ahead.
Okay, because here we go again, giving thousands of dollars away to museums, events, and things like that. But every year for election, everyone's up in arms about pro-life. And but what happens, which I am for pro-life, but what happens to these babies when they are born and we just turn a blind eye? And so I would like to at least see $20,000 to each one of these programs to help what these efforts are going towards and people that are, needing help, So at least give to where is needed, at least $20,000 like we're giving to these events.
All right, so skipping ahead, but it's appropriate, looking at those last three, you're speaking of the Gulf Coast Women's Center for Nonviolence, the Family Justice Center,
Yes.
and the Women's Resource Center.
Yes.
Which is.
And
which
I would
is-
actually like to go back to the CASA as well. I think we should go ahead and give them $20,000 as well.
Well, the Women's Resource Center is not affiliated with the Gulf Coast Center, correct? It's different. So let's take them.
Well, then let's make another addition then.
Let's take this one at a time. So these last three, Gulf Coast Women's Center, non-departmental 114 was asking for $30,000. Family Justice Center was asking for $20,000. Women's Resource Center was asking for $11,500. your preference is that they all be allocated
If we're
$20,000.
gonna give $20,000 to an event, I would like to at least see 20,000 to something like that.
Okay, so what you're requesting, though, is for us to consider is $20,000 for the Gulf Coast Women's Center, $20,000 for the Family Justice Center, and $20,000 for the Women's Resource Center, correct?
Correct, and CASA as well.
We'll come back to CASA in a moment.
And the Women's Resource Center, is that different? Okay.
Well, that's one of
and
the three
both
that
of them, I know that there are CBD funds going towards them, but I'd like to give them as more like they requested as well.
Let me back up just for a moment, because the Women's Resource Center, to my knowledge, is not getting any community development block grant funding. It's the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, so they're
I would like
getting,
to give them more on top of the CBDG money.
okay, so we're leaving, so they're getting 20,000 from the heebie-jeebie dollars is what I call them, okay? So let's go back to your original thought, Ms. Newman, which was Gulf Coast Center, Women's Center for Nonviolence. They've requested 30,000. You want us to
least give 20.
allocate 20,000, okay? I can go with 20,000. Is everybody good with that up here?
Thank you.
Okay, so we're good with that for 20,000. The Family Justice Center, they're requesting 20,000, so they're already at 20,000. The Women's Resource Center is at 11.5, and you'd like us to consider raising that to 20,000.
Yes,
Is that
please.
correct? Are there any thoughts, discussions on that?
You shifted that 10 grand over, we got enough to allocate it. I think it's reasonable.
Any other thoughts?
I agree.
We're all good with 20,000 then for the Women's Resource Center. All right, that brings us, so when the dust settles, Gulf Coast Women's Center for Nonviolence, non-departmental 114 is at 20,000. Non-departmental 179, the Family Justice Center is at 20,000. And the Women's Resource Center is at 20,000. Now, Ms. Newman, you'd like us to go back to CASA?
Yes, please.
All right, we had consensually agreed to that at 10,000. You'd like to make the case for 20,000 instead of 10,000?
Yes, please.
Okay. And any thoughts, comments, consideration? Personally, I'm good with it at 10,000. Again, I'm looking forward to, after we finish this topic, when we're almost done here, we're going to move on to the budget, and I'd like to talk about pay raises.
So CASA requested 10, they didn't request 20, but you're saying to increase it even though they only asked for 10?
My argument is, if we're gonna give 20,000 to events and things like that, we can at least give 20,000 to programs that are trying to help these children that are most likely been born into these situations that were like pro-life. You must have this baby, and then everyone turns a blind eye to what actually happens to these children once they're born. Like, we should be giving money to these programs that are actually trying to help the community. I mean, the events are great and all, but what do they really do?
Well, and I'll just say about events, there's many of these events that tie charities into the event itself. I know the Mardi Gras cruise, I know Cruising the Coast, I can go on with several of the events, not necessarily the baseball tournament, but again, that's only a $3,000 ask. But a lot of those special events do tie in.
I get that, but it
community.
does make a precedence from the actual city to be giving
But
more effort towards.
I'm just answering your question. You said, what do the events give? I'm not saying the city shouldn't look at that with a good heart. I'm just saying, I'm answering your
Actually,
question.
that'd be a nice requirement from the city to make sure, if you do have an event, that you do give so much of the proceeds to a charity of your choice or something. Actually, that's something that'd be nice. But for the city to actually make an effort towards these types of efforts to actually help the community like that, I think, would go a long way as well, especially if we're going to be giving to museums and things like that. I mean, we're giving lots of money to these museums, but what about the children? That's all.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion? Again, I'm not in favor of increasing it to 20,000. I'm good at 10,000, which is what they requested. Any other thoughts on this?
I'm good at 10.
You're good at 10,
For
Mr.
CASA.
Glavin. Give me some idea of where we stand as a council so we can get some consensus here. Mr. Shoemaker, you good? 10, 15?
Certainly, I think they need all the money they can get. However, just the way I'm looking at this, they requested 10,000, so I'm good with the
Okay,
10,000.
Mr. McGilvery.
I think they were just being humble because through the years, we've only given them so much. I think that's part of most of what they ask. Well, the city's not gonna give me, some do, because they're like, well, if you don't ask, you don't get. But for the most part, like, just like $3,000 for the Crime Stoppers, they're like, well, they usually don't give and this and that, so they're trying to be humble. I think they deserve more. And just like, even Chief has said that they even saved the city so much money, you know what I mean? So I think they're being humble here. Even if I was to ask for a donation, it's kind of like, well, anything's better than nothing,
Well, they got this one.
Okay,
She would like the,
On behalf of CASA?
sure, go ahead. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Sure. If you would state your name for the record, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Cynthia Chauvin. I'm the director of CASA of South Mississippi. I first want to applaud someone for saying that. As a small nonprofit, we currently have 249 kids in Harrison County that are in foster care. We're able to serve 105 of them at the moment. So the money that we requested, the $10,000, has historically supported the recruitment and training of volunteers. But there are more than 100 additional kids that we can't serve because we don't have enough volunteers. So to consider a request of additional money, you would know that the money was going to directly help child victims. Currently, of the 105 that we serve, 47 live in Biloxi. And there are other kids that live in Biloxi that don't have the opportunity to have a CASA volunteer. So while I know you'll have tough budget decisions, I just want to say, regardless of what you decide, thank you for considering the request of Ms. Newman, and thank you for standing up for the innocent child victims of Biloxi that need an advocate in court.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All right, Mr. Guines, you have a thought one way or the other?
Yeah, after hearing that, I kind of go along with that. And worst case scenario, I'm all about splitting the difference, at least $5,000 more.
So you could go with CASA for 15,000?
I can go for it.
All right, Ms. Newman prefers 20,000. I'm at 10,000.
Even though they asked for 10, I'll go.
I'd like to go ahead and add, thank you, Ms. Chauvin, for speaking, and I will have to change my stance on that. I'll agree with 20,000.
thank you.
20,000, okay. Anybody else wish to change? So we got a,
I'm gonna stick with the 20,000 too.
so we have 3 20,000s and we have 3 10,000s.
Come on, McGilvery.
I said, I agree.
did?
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree.
Oh, you agree?
I'll go for 20.
Okay, so it looks
we
like
got
there's
4.
there's a consensus on
Come on,
$20,000.
Paul. You could come. Come on, Paul.
I can't do it. I'm sorry. I would like to point out that again, with federal dollars, 30, 50, 75, what we're doing here, we're probably looking at almost $100,000 helping the youth or families cumulatively. But so we've got 3 at 20,000. I'm not there yet. Mr. Shoemaker is at 20,000, correct? All right, so there's a consensus of $20,000.
There's still time.
Thank y'all.
Okay,
Appreciate
so
it.
is everybody clear on what you're getting from the city? We're not voting on it. It'll be on the next agenda or when we approve the budget. But Diana, you got all the notes for that? Okay.
I got something to add. That,
Sure, Mr.
is there any more items on there?
These are all the items that I have. I think I've covered them all.
I had a conversation with Gulf Coast Carnival Association, and they couldn't make it to these budget meetings, but they kind of went over their different events that they hold at the Coliseum, that they hold at, again, various hotels and casinos, the big parade that they put on, and the floats that they bring. They share, and I was aware of it, certain costs like insurance and requirements the city has for different things. And they asked for consideration of $2,500 for Gulf Coast Carnival Association. In the past, we have given some money, quite a bit more, I think, around 10 grand a year or 10 or 20 in the past. And so I'd just like to throw it out there at their request, $2,500.
So we didn't receive a request until this moment from Mr. Glavin for $2,500 for the Gulf Coast Carnival.
And I'm not a member, by the way, of that crew. I'm a member of a
What is that now?
competing crew, Gulf Coast Carnival Association.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a member, I just want to,
Wonder how many members they have. Surely one or two could have appeared here and written a letter to send it
All
like
right,
everybody
Kenny.
else did. I'm not in favor just because it's a last minute
and by the way,
request.
the charities, again, many of you may be aware of the charities that they contribute to and the many different events leading up to Carnival that they give to the kids and children and needy families. So,
Mr. Shoemaker, any thoughts on that last minute request?
How much was it?
2,500.
I can support the 2,500 on that, I think. And I believe they do give to charities as well, so I'm fine with that.
Okay, I'm not there.
Just real quick, I would like to add,
Gilvery.
when the city gives the money, though, they can get more federal funding matched, unlike, if a parade gives money to the charity. You know what I mean? That's the only difference as well.
Mr. McGilvery.
They do support charity. I'll go for the 2,500 too.
Ms. Newman, you're good with 25, Mr. Guines?
Good.
Okay. All right, there appears to be consensus at 2,500. If the administration would make a note for that, please. So this is, never mind, I'll pass on the comment I was going to make. But there's a lesson to be learned here today. I'm sure you all learned it. All right. That concludes I think our work on the non-departmentals. I don't think I've missed anything. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, I didn't hear you, Mr. Lynn.
We vote on this next meeting.
Right, when, all this will be approved officially when we adopt the budget, whenever that might be. But these are the numbers that we're plugging in for your organizations, your entities or agencies, okay, for this next fiscal year. Okay? You're welcome to stick around if you like. Otherwise, we're moving on in this workshop. Diane, I do have one question. In the executive department, there's a non-departmental 520, and I wasn't sure what that was for. The amount's $42,770. I'm guessing that the one above it, it's line item 6432. The one above it was
BTV.
It's BTV. Okay. The other one was for B News. I suspect. Okay. Thank you. All right. Next, we'll move on to the budget. Again, okay. Just sort of a summary to this point. I think we're all on board with the police department pay raise. Were there any questions or comments about that? Now's the time to speak. I'm good with it. Does anybody have questions or comments about the raise for the police department? Okay. The next thing is I prepared well, I'll get to that in a moment. The mayor's proposing 3% for all the other employees, and there's some question about how that 3% is calculated. And the mayor's not here today, so we'll just do the best we can, I think. But additionally, the mayor had stated, I believe at an August 6th meeting, because Mr. Lawrence had posed a question if we were going to increase the employee pay raise from 3% to 5%. I think the mayor said it would cost an additional $400,000. I don't know how that's possible. I would think it would be a little more than that, but what do I know? Y'all have all the figures. But Carrie, if you could pull up this PowerPoint.
To understand, include these guys.
I think it's possible to go from 3% to 5% if we're looking to find $400,000. That's my understanding. Is that your understanding as well, Diana? Okay. What, do you have a different figure or any? Well, the administration has thought we're doing 3%, but some of us have been talking for 5%. We want to look at finding that extra money to do that 5%. So I know you're seeing this for the first time, but I'm just doing a little research. If I'm way off base or I'm not thinking critically or accurately, please don't hesitate to chime in. Okay, next slide if you would. So here's the annual Social Security cost of living adjustments, and that first line is from the year 2000 to 2024, and that, 25 years, it's averaged 2.5, almost 2.6%. It's in the last 25 years. The line below that is for the last 20 years. The line below that is for the last 15 years. The next to the last line is for the last, 10 years? Thank you. And the line below that is just for the last 4 years. That comes from the Social Security website. And that's a good frame of reference, I believe. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So the administration is proposing a 3% pay raise. At the August 6th meeting, the question was posed, what would it cost for an additional 2%? And the response was $400,000. So got a little time doing a little research. I'm wondering where we can find that $400,000. I'll get to you in a moment, Mr. Leonard. Next slide, please. So the number of city employees is fully staffed, there's 709 city employees. There's 646 are paid out of the general fund. The port and water and sewer proprietary funds employ 63 folks, so they're paid out of those funds. Will all of these positions be budgeted in this current fiscal year? In the next fiscal year? Are we budgeting for each of these departments in their personnel budgets? Are we budgeting for 709 positions?
Yes.
Okay. How many of those positions are likely to remain vacant? We really have no way to gauge that other than perhaps the past, right?
We have no way to object. We don't know tomorrow if the
That's correct, but we can look back.
decides to hire our firefighters.
Right, but we can look back historically at some things. Next slide, please. It's a pretty busy slide, but I'll try and walk you through it. First column on the left is the fiscal year, and budgeted for personnel in each of those fiscal years was that amount listed under original. So for example, what was budgeted in fiscal year, the current year, 2024, is $49,847,902. What's projected for this next year, fiscal year 25, is $51.7 million and some change. Okay. Let's go down to fiscal year 2023. $47.7 million was budgeted. The final was roughly 46 million, a little change. The actual, and in this case, this is going to be period 13. It's when we closed the books, the actual was 45 million, almost 46 million. My point being that what was budgeted, 47.7 million, and what the actual was when the dust settled, we actually paid about 46 million. So that left $1.8 million on the table. Would that be accurate?
It's accurate that every year since I've been here, the last 8 years,
Our back pocket,
Correct. And
even in the hurricane years, well, it got a little tight.
right. Well, what I've done is just gone back to 2015 And based on the audits is where I pulled these figures. But you can see that last column, the next to the last column there, if it's in parentheses, that's money that was unspent in that fiscal year. What was budgeted but not spent. And then that last column is just expressed as a percent.
And that's the genesis of beginning and ending fund balance.
Sure, that has, because it rolls over.
The rollover is our beginning,
Right.
goes into our beginning fund balance.
Sure, what's unspent is goes into the pot for next year. It's reallocated. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm thinking, well, if we're looking just to find $400,000, where can we find $400,000? Well, what's budgeted this year for personnel with all the positions, all 700 positions, less the water and sewer that are coming out of the general fund, is 51 million. If we reduce this, in other words, we didn't fund all the positions at 100%. If we funded all the personnel positions at 99 and 99.9, let me say, 99.8.5, 9.5, excuse me. In other words, if we just reduce the amount budgeted for all personnel costs by half of 1%, that would generate almost $260,000. If we reduced what was budgeted by 0.75%, that would make available almost $388,000. That's almost the $400,000 we're looking for. And then you can see if we funded a little less than 100% by 1% or 1.25% or 1.5%, you could see how much money that makes available. Next slide, please. Or, if you don't want to look at reducing what's budgeted for personnel, to put that towards an additional 2%, you could total all the proposed supplies and services for all the departments for fiscal year 2025. Based on the latest figures I had, that's going to be $23.4 million. So what if we reduced the supplies and the contractual services and there's another services in there? What if you reduce that by half of 1%?
A few less ditches.
Exactly. That's one of the things you weigh. But you make available $117,000. By 0.75%, $175,000. By 1%, that makes $234,000 available of that $400,000 we're looking for. Anyway, you get the idea. So we're looking at, we just looked so far just at salaries that are budgeted, and the best of my recollection, we've had, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had roughly 20 patrol positions that we just hadn't filled in the last year or two. It could be a little more than that, could be a little less than that, but about 20 positions roughly. So we know that not all of our positions are going to be filled. In a perfect world, they would be, would be doing well. Yes, sir, Mr. Leonard.
That's a pretty good crystal ball you've got.
Well, it's as good as anybody else's. What I can tell you is it's hard to gauge the future. The best gauge I have is to look back at the past. In some years, we've budgeted, but unspent is little. I mean, we were close to the mark, missed it by $500,000. Sometimes it's been over $2 million. So, I mean, I think, and again, that's money that's carried over for the next year. But when we're looking at a 3% raise, and just with a little bit of effort, just with some effort, we could go another 2% at least. I think we could find it here. And I'm looking at 3 sources. This is the second one, but personnel, you can clip that a little bit. You could clip it by 1%, I suspect, which would generate, I don't know, quite a bit of money, for those pay raises and maybe a little more than an additional 2%. But the third one is, what if we looked, next slide, please. All right, the next slide. What if we looked at all the department totals? If you took the police budget and added the fire budget, the public works budget, and so forth, if you looked at all the department budgets, it would total 81.7 million. So what if we just took half of 1% of that figure, reduced all the departmental budgets by half of 1%? That would yield 409,000. There you go, one fell swoop right there, or any combination of these three. Next slide, please. Question dealing with the millage. We apportioned some of the millage for debt. Are we looking at moving any of that millage from the debt side to the operational side? Do you know if we're moving any millage from the debt side to the operational side? Oh, it's set. It's going to remain the same as it was last year. So what are we apportioning for debt right now, the millage for debt?
It's at 7.9 mils,
All right.
and it's up from last year.
Okay, so that reduced the amount of millage on the operational side accordingly, right? Okay, so it's up from last year. What was it last year, do you recall?
7.67.
Okay, so that would be a quarter of, maybe 300,000, somewhere in there. Okay. What about the DNR? That's a disability and retirement. Is that being reduced? How much is it going down, roughly? 0.08. Okay, so that's really negligible. Appreciate that. Okay, next slide, please. Other possible sources. The insurance and premium expense, is it a little over 3.33 million, 3.4 million. Can we realize anything by changing the coverage there to reduce that by 100,000? Is that, okay, so that's not property insurance. My understanding was that was, yeah, so the council has nothing to do with the property insurance. Y'all are the ones that work on that figure. Beg your pardon?
I didn't meet with them last year. You, Kenny, and George did. Back in March. I'm not recalling. Kenny, do you recall anything with property insurance? Do you recall any decisions we made or whatever? I don't.
The only thing we did during our budget discussions was to allocate an amount last year for the insurance, and it was debated that it may be too less of an amount that we made that decision, but we did reduce the budget allocations in anticipating that the cost for that insurance would be lower. That's what I recall. So
okay. All right.
We didn't actually make a decision that I recall to reduce.
And as I recall, the administration has always dealt with property insurance. I mean, I only recall working with health insurance for the employees. I know that Mr. Lawrence's comment last year was we could have saved more on property insurance, and there was some discussion about that.
Did that this past year.
Okay, I think it was 3.5 million last year, so it would be about 3.4 million this year. Okay, that's fine. All right, legal. We talked about legal general is 800,000 parked there.
And we never know what we're going to need there. And when we talked about the departmental budgets, the administration said, we've got to have all 800,000 there. We don't know what's coming up, and we may have some issues that continue in the future, if I remember correctly, Mr. Abide, is that correct? But I mean, if we were 100,000 short, we could reduce that by, the council could reduce that by 100,000. Then you have other contractual services. I think this is out of Public Works, and I want to say off the top of my head, I may be incorrect. At 3/4 of the way through the year, I think we had spent half that amount, but again, during discussion on departments, the administration wanted that left there. I just want to put those numbers up there because they're big numbers, but if you needed 100,000 here or 100,000 there and you couldn't find it anywhere where else, that might be a possibility. Go to the next slide, please. This is projected revenue. Again, similar table to the others. Fiscal year, what we projected is revenue, what the final figure was on the revenue that we got, and what the actual revenue was when the dust settled, and the amount difference there. So if you look at, for example, fiscal year 2022, we looked at revenue of 69 million. The final figure was 60 million. The actual was roughly 70.1 million. And the actual versus the original, there was about $10.5 million realized there. And there are various reasons for that. This was coming in the wake of COVID. It could have been ARPA. It could have been a number of things. But I just wanted to throw that up there. The next slide, please. So there's some questions, because during one of our budget discussions, we talked about increasing the floor to $15 an hour, and we knew that there was going to be, and there has been, a ripple effect as you have to move people up as well, not just. Right.
Meaning less vacancies.
Right. Then we talked about 3%. My question was, if I have a job, whatever I'm being paid this year, next year, if I calculate an additional 3%, that ought to be my pay raise. And there was a qualified response, if I remember correctly, and I want to be sure that I remember correctly. If I'm not, please correct me. But if you got a promotion after July 31st, you would not get a pay raise. You got a promotion, so you don't get a pay raise. Is that accurate?
July 1.
July 1, okay,
But
thank you.
there are certain positions that had changes in grades earlier than that are not included in that date range. There's a few exceptions here and there.
Okay. The point I'm trying to make is that it was qualified. What if I got a merit pay?
Like the what?
What if I got a merit pay increase last month or 7 months ago, typically referred to as a pay bump? Does that affect my 3%?
If you got one last month, yes, you're not going to get one again come October 1. But if you got one last December, you will get one come October 1.
Okay, so the cutoff point would be roughly July 1st?
Correct.
So July 1st, and so if I got a pay bump or a promotion after July 1st,
But hold on, dispatchers got one, I think, in June. They went up several grades. They will not be getting one come October 1.
okay, well, no, that's good. That's good to know. I'm just trying to be sure everybody understands when they hear 3%, that doesn't necessarily mean 3%. It depends on circumstances. Thank you. What about longevity? That's not included, I don't believe. It's a separate item entirely. Thank you. And pay bands, I remember there was something about if everybody got a 3%, then some of the pay bands would have to be adjusted or something. I'm assuming that if you're at the top of the pay band, would you still get a 3% increase if you were already at the top of the pay band?
We only have one employee that hit the max, and theirs will be reduced.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think that ends my presentation. Thank you for being patient. Appreciate everybody's patience here. My thought being that, and I'd like to spend a little time and get thoughts from the other council members. Do we sit on 3% or do we move to 5%? What I've tried to do, and I'm certainly will open the floor for any comments, Diane, or any guidance you can offer us, Mike. I think it's possible to go to 5% for the other employees. Eager to learn what thoughts you may have on this.
I think 5% is the way to go. I do have a question going back to the pay raise. I'm new on the board, obviously, and if an employee gets a pay raise, or scratch that, if an employee gets a merit bonus in July, they can't get to 3 or 5%?
Not how we did it.
I didn't hear you.
That is not how we did it. July 1 was the cutoff if you had a merit increase.
What determined July 1st? Why was that selected?
Budgeting.
Okay.
Is that written in ordinance? Is that an ordinance?
No.
No.
Just,
None of this is in an
Right. Okay. So,
I think the presentation was outstanding, and I think there's ways to come up with the other 2%. I've said that from day one, and I think there's a way to mold that.
you want to go next? Okay. All right, Mr. Glavin, have a comment?
So again, I'm all about what is the goal? And when we started this several months ago, the goal was to assess each department fairly and to ensure that they were being compensated on the upper echelon compared to their peers. So we didn't want anybody going to any other city around us and saying, I'm leaving because I can be paid better at another city that's in the area and do the job that I'm doing for Biloxi. So in my opinion, that was one of our goals, to ensure we're setting the compensation for our team at the upper echelon in the department that they're working in. That's number one. Number two, and I say compensation, I don't say wages, I say compensation. We had nearly $100,000 increase in our insurance this past year when we're getting ready, or we renewed our health insurance. And employees currently pay somewhere, where is it, 90, we paid 94%, 93%. And the cities pay 7%. Even those costs went up nearly a percentage. Our recommendation was not to increase the insurance premium. If we held it at that standard, then that would have been another percent. We would have nicked our team members, and we didn't recommend that. So then it comes back to, in good faith, the mayor has worked on with his team, what does a 3% look like with some of these stipulations, like the July 1 cutoff or whatever, so that we can kind of put this into effect and give some kind of increase. And I don't want people to interpret, my stance is I'm focused on this 3%, and if we can do 5, 6, 7, 8%, I'd love to do 5, 6, 8%. But one of the threats on Councilman Tisdale's presentation and his slides is that projected revenue. That projected revenue is not certain. In fact, we're battling inflation. We're battling. I'm in the hospitality industries, and we see our occupancies dipping, which is one big pot of where our revenue stream comes in. Just on the compensation, if I looked at the slides right, nearly $50 million is in our compensation, or what we pay our employees out of the 70 million, 72 million, and that rest we got to stretch out to serve the city. So we got to be careful with that. I'm all for being a little progressive, and if we do 3% today, how can we stair step into the employees can look forward to a future that if we hit certain benchmarks, then we know we have the ability to compensate our employees. But I'm all in for the 3%. I have followed it for months now. I think it's very doable and achievable. I'm not saying the 5% isn't, but we have to look at these metrics very, very carefully, or we could get in trouble.
Councilman,
you.
I think you were on the mark there when you did, the one word you didn't say was hurricane. Impact on the uncertainty of the impact of storms on our revenues this early in the year.
Even with
It
the,
may be more clear as we go later in the year.
If you would have told me 3 years ago and I looked at that slide and I knew where the revenues were going, I mean, you could feel the momentum the Biloxi was having with these numbers. In fact, I've sat in these very meetings and I've told the mayor, your number is too low. And I said, why don't we bump it up another million? And you can see there was another million in those numbers, but I'm not certain these revenue figures are going to hold, because sometimes we find ourselves in a 2 or 3 year dip, and I hope we're not there. I hope we can continue to grow it. But that's what's concerning to me. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, thank you. So if
Thank
I
you.
understood, Mr. Glavin, you're at 3% right now. Maybe we'll look.
I'm open
down the
to
road.
any amount, but I can see the light for the 3%.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes before we have to.
may
Hang
I-
on just a moment. We have to close this meeting in a couple of minutes for the public budget hearing. But go ahead, Mr. Guines. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
okay.
We don't
Well,
have much
I
time.
thought we were in the discussion mode, and
We
I
are.
thought that we were going to get an opportunity to express our views on it. I'm in favor of Councilman Glavin. You know, as we start looking at our departments, I don't think we can ask them to cut any more in our departments. They're already at their wit's end right now, as they are. The whole goal was to make sure our employees got something, and the 3% is something. Although I would love to do 5%, would love to do 8%, but we're talking about fiscal responsibility, and we need to be responsible. Councilman Glavin mentioned something about a hurricane. Well, what about that Bunny Carey spillway and what effect it had on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, in particular Biloxi? You know, what about our contractor services? Right now, our workers can't hardly get out there. But we do have an opportunity the first of the year to kind of look at where we are, to possibly bump this up if we need to bump it up. But right now, I'm like Councilman Glavin, the 3% right now assures that we get something for our employees. And then in January, February, I think this council need to be charged with looking at it again and possibly doing a bump, depending on how things are. But right now, that would not be physically responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guines. Ms. Newman, any thoughts?
Councilman Glavin brought up a good point, being that I'm in business as well. You also have to take into consideration, once you bump the pay for employees and then the revenues go down, you're yourself in a pickle. So we really need to take all that into consideration. We are into a recession right now, let's be honest, and who knows how long we're going to be, if it's going to get worse, if it's going to get better. The other thing is too, I wouldn't mind doing 5% if we don't cut the department budgets. We need to make sure that we have what we need to give our employees the skills to use. Otherwise, they're just twiddling their thumbs and we're not getting anywhere still. So we need to take those into consideration, that's all.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker, any thoughts?
Yes. I think, Councilman Glavin, I agree 100% with what you said. However, I think Councilman Tisdale laid out a great plan. I think there's some places listed in his plan, in some of those slides, that I think we can get the money. I understand it's, I believe, $400,000, but I feel of any time, as far back as I know, now's the time. I mean, recession is bad. I get it. The economy's terrible. Even more of a reason, and I know we have fiscal responsibility for the city, but we've got to take care of the employees. They're the backbone of the city. Without them, we don't have anything. We see how much of a struggle it is now to hire, maintain, and retain the employees we have. We've got to get them something. I wish we could get them a whole lot more than we're talking here. 3%'s okay, 5%'s okay, not near enough in my opinion. I support 5%, at minimum 5%, 100%. If, whatever we can get, but it needs to be at least 5%. I don't think we need to back down. If there's a way to get to 5%, by all means, let's try to do it. Two real quick questions. If there's an employee who changes from one department in the city to another department in the city. Okay. If there's an employee in one department in the city that transfers or moves to another department within the city, and they have, I don't know, instead of, say we give a 5% raise, we approve a 5% raise, and they get a, say, 1 or 2% raise. I'm just using hypotheticals. Are they going to get, if we get a 5%, will they get that 5% pay raise, or are they only going to get the 2% difference in the old department versus the new department they went to?
I can't answer that off the top of my head because I don't think I had anyone in that situation. Everyone that went from one department to another got a substantial pay raise, and they were excluded.
If there is anybody, there's a way we can find that. I just want to make certain that nobody falls in the cracks when we get the pay raise.
No, I mean, I went through and made sure people had at least 3%.
Right, okay.
But there's one person transferring from one department to another. They will get a 3% pay raise because they're going for the same amount of pay.
What if we end up, hopefully, approving a 5%?
And everybody gets a 5% on the same.
So it's going to be the same?
Right, it would still move the same way.
Okay, last question real quick. I know you mentioned earlier July was the cutoff date. Who approved, where'd that date come from? Who was that made the date July?
In the middle of budgeting process, and the mayor and I discussed it.
Okay, all right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, just a summary comment, and then we'll adjourn the meeting so we can begin the public hearing on the budget. You know, I tried to lay out several different options so we have choices. That's why I think the additional 2% is affordable, just in the positions that will go vacant, that aren't filled, or that remain empty for all or part of the year. Having said that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
By Mr. Guines. Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Glavin. Any discussion? All in favor? It's approved on a 6-0 vote. Thank you. We're adjourned. We'll start the public budget hearing in about 1 minute. Thank you.
Weird.